Some of you may remember me and my wife, Deborah, who presented last year on our Inn project here in Machias, the Broadway Inn. My lovely wife, Deborah, has joined in as well. Pleased to see her. I haven't seen her in a couple of days, so it's actually really nice to see her on camera. Thanks, Deb. It's we're a little bit on different schedules right now, but we're just getting back into Machias a little bit after some work other places. So anyway, yeah, as Susie said, I'm James Rawsthorne. I am the Telepresence coordinator for NOAA and their Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. And let me turn on my slideshow here. And now that everybody sees what I look like. And let's see. There we go. So yeah, I've been at NOAA for about 9 years now. Our program is about 20 years old. And we are the only federal organization dedicated to exploring the deep ocean, which surprises a lot of people and surprised me when I first started at NOAA. I assumed that there would be probably several groups, but we're literally the only one that's tasked with exploring the ocean. And that's really the focus of our efforts is, like the Star Trek mantra, to go where people have not gone before and explore areas that have not previously been explored. And that actually is a great deal of the ocean's bottom floor have not been explored. I think we usually use about 90% of the ocean has not been explored. And so there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of places to go. And the first question I'm usually asked about our group when I tell people I work in ocean exploration is, oh, so you're a diver. And an interesting fact is that we don't actually have any divers of the human variety. All of our divers are ROV robots. And it has been that way since our program's inception. A lot of people have the Jacques Cousteau model in their head when they think about ocean exploration. And while he was an inspiration to a lot of us, his model, for a variety of reasons, has kind of fallen by the wayside for us somewhat. And that's for a couple of factors. It's hard on the diver's health. It is difficult to get to the deeper depths, for sure. And the combination of being a diver and a marine biologist is difficult skill set to combine in a lot of instances. A lot of marine biologists are not actually divers. So it's a skill set that requires a very specific combination. The robot ROV program really is an outgrowth of some 70s technology development, where they started off, I think a lot of people probably remember submersibles, where people would get in the submersible and then they'd take the submersible somewhere. And that was kind of the first evolution of it. And where we have kind of evolved to is, you guys see the picture of the Deep Discoverer there at the top right, completely remote control robots. And beneath that is a picture of our ship, our group ship, the Okeanos Explorer. There's a lot of debate in the field around physical contact with exploration, and it kind of mirrors a lot of the debate for NASA and space exploration. There are advocates that say that people are an intrinsic part of the research, and putting a person in the place is very important. We certainly understand that argument, and don't deny that there can be advantages to having a person-place experience. It's just not our focus at NOAA for a variety of reasons of safety, cost, efficiency, and scientific research. We have to be very efficient with our scientific research, and the use of the ROVs is actually a much more productive science gathering tool for us. Just a little background about me personally. I'm a Flagler College graduate in St. Augustine, Florida. My education is really in computer science. And that's a picture of Flagler College in the upper right there. I worked for the Department of Energy at the National Renewable Energy Lab for about 12 years before coming to NOAA. So I've been in government research for quite a while and doing a variety of technology-based development in streaming video, streaming media, streaming data. mostly in a live sense, some archival as well. I'm not a scientist, nor am I a marine biologist, and have very little training in either. I'm one of our few group members in ocean exploration who doesn't have a doctorate. Most of our group is of that education level. And I am just a bachelor's holder who came up through the technology ranks and joined this program. We're a fairly small program, only about 50 people in our group. And our money comes directly from Congress. Congress votes on our budget every year, as opposed to almost every other governmental institution which gets their money from a hierarchical basis. Like most people working at NOAA, funding for their science operations comes from NOAA or the Department of Commerce. Ours actually comes directly from Congress, and this is because of a presidential edict going back about 25 years that established our program, and that Congress would fund us directly. It has its pluses and minuses. Usually it's a plus because it's a fairly popular program, and we get a lot of support from a lot of different sectors. That actually keeps our budget fairly solid. And just FYI, our budget runs about $40 to $50 million a year, which for 50 people is actually a fairly sizable budget. And what we actually end up doing is having outside scientists and scientific groups that we fund for research expeditions that we participate with. So we actually do a lot of partnerships with a lot of different groups in research. A little bit about the background of telepresence and its relationship to ocean research. There's a fellow named Bob Ballard who rediscovered the Titanic in the Atlantic in 1985. And he is kind of the front man for ocean-based telepresence because of his long work in the telepresence field. He was one of the first people to really, in the 70s, grasp the concept of using remote vehicles for ocean research, and did a lot of the early development on both manned submersibles, and then that evolved into the unmanned submersibles. Elvin in the 70s was his first manned submersible, and there's a picture there on the left of it, and extensively used, and but still had passenger occupants that they would put in, they'd drop it over the side, they'd go down to the depths, and people would actually drive the submersible and pilot it around and do the research from that angle. It's an interesting, as I discuss with people who are like, well, you can't really separate the person from the research. There's always, in undersea research, there's always a separation because people cannot breathe underwater. So there's almost always a technology connection between the person and the actual objects that we're doing research on and areas we're doing research on. So it's very rare that someone would put their hands actually on the material. Even back in the 70s, they'd use grappling hooks, they'd use all kinds of devices to take samples and video. So there's almost always a connecting technology between the objects we're researching and the research that's ongoing. And so really it becomes a matter of varying degree of separation from the object you're researching to your position point. And this is really kind of the baseline of ocean telepresence. And so as we get into the 80s, it evolved into the picture you see there on the right, which is kind of we call it a sled, but it became an unmanned submersible at first in the 80s. And this is what they actually first sent down to the Titanic in the Atlantic to make sure it was the Titanic, because at first they weren't sure it was actually the wreck of the Titanic. And so the first vehicle actually at the Titanic was an unmanned submersible. And then what they did was they followed up with a manned submersible, which is what most people are familiar with. And you can see it just off of Bob Ballard's right shoulder. That's the manned submersible at the Titanic. And that's what a lot of the footage that you will see from the Titanic is. But actually the first vehicle there was an unmanned one. And as the 80s went on and we started to evolve this a little bit more, they Bob built a vehicle called Jason, which was really kind of the prototype of a lot of ROVs going forward. And that really gave rise to a huge development sector for oil and gas. And there's a company called Oceaneering that does a lot of undersea oil and gas. You know, they maintain the oil derricks, all kinds of stuff. They have about 500 to 600 ROVs active at any given point in time. That's how big the scale from really when they started to grab hold in the 80s until now has grown. And it really is the standard for undersea exploration work and development is the robot ROV that's remotely controlled from the ship. And where we're at now as far as evolution is, the next stage of evolution is literally drones under the water. And we're building these unmanned drones, you know, in, you know, scales of dozens for operation to hundreds for deployment. So that's kind of going to be the next stage of operation. While we're going to continue with our ROV project, the drone kind of model is actually really coming on board. And that's just a further extension of telepresence, because now we have the Okeanos Explorer ship that is controlling the robot via cable. The drones will be completely untethered and will be controlled from land for the most part. So that's kind of the stage of evolution of where we are with ocean research. You know, I like to use the analogy for telepresence. The Star Trek concept of teleportation is a kind of a contrasting point. And when the Star Trek Enterprise would go places, it would actually send the researchers down to the planet's surface. And that's teleportation. And that was really limited to a crew of just a couple of guys. And then in the picture, you can see the guy in the red shirt doesn't even get a mask. You know he's not going to make it back to the ship. He's the expendable guy. And it's really kind of reflective. It is a dangerous situation to put people on the ground in an unfamiliar environment. You know, can they breathe the air? What if their oxygen masks fail? You know, and I can't believe they didn't even give this guy a mask. He should know he's not coming back. But nonetheless, that's teleportation, and that's really putting people in the place of the research. Telepresence is the exact opposite. It's putting the science and the object you're researching where you are, and it's bringing it to us. And so that's kind of our job, is to bring the science from the location where it's geolocated to the people doing the research. And this is super critical because we can't always put the scientists we want on board the ship. And even if they're on board the ship, there are real limitations to the research they can do on the ship. We have bandwidth constraints, we have equipment restraints, we can only take a couple of people. They've got to stay at sea for the most part for the entire tenure of the expedition. It requires something of an emergency to offboard someone in the middle of an expedition, and it is a real interruption. So you're basically signing on for a month. As my wife Deborah knows, you're signing on and you're there until we're done or an emergency happens. And that's inconvenient for the scientists. It's incredibly expensive to put someone to sea for a month. And so the model we've evolved for the scientists doing research on shore is this telepresence model, where we bring the science to them. And it's also a hugely expansion factor. So now we can involve scientists across the country, you know, and not just scientists, the general public and school groups and college groups like yourself, and everyone can participate. So it really opens it up, not just to the people on board the ship, but to anyone who really wants to participate in an expedition. And this is really
Gail,
a break. Go ahead.
Gail Peters said she had a question.
Yeah, go, Gail.
Yeah, James, do you also use the argument that by using telepresence rather than physical bodies, that you're less impactful on the environment itself?
Most definitely, Gail. That's a great question. And yes, and that's one of our focus points is, you know, we don't want to impact the things we're studying at all. You know, We do samples occasionally, and you may see the robot arms grabbing some rocks, some pieces of coral. Super selective about the samples we take. There's actually discussions about every sample before it's taken, as far as the impact we'll have and the ramifications of taking something off the ocean floor. And that really relates to both biology and shipwrecks. We rarely take a piece of a shipwreck. We do take biology samples, but large discussions around the impact of every sample we take. And usually we limit it to rocks, corals, things of a lower organic scale than things that are more highly developed and evolved, such as octopus, sharks. We almost never take samples from higher evolved life forms. And not all that often of even like corals, and definitely not rare corals. We are super selective about our sampling. I've been on expeditions and been part of expeditions where samples are taken heavily, and there's a huge difference between it. There's a couple other research groups that bear mentioning. Oops, I don't have a slide for it, but Bob Bellard has a ship called the Nautilus, and they work out of a institution at the University of Rhode Island called the Inner Space Center. It's kind of a play off of outer space. And we do a lot of work with them. I talk to them at least 3 or 4 times a day. But that's kind of Bob Ballard's institution at the University of Rhode Island's Inner Space Center. And we at NOAA work in close connection with them. The Scripps Institute off the coast of California does a lot of work in this arena. And there's actually a group, Smith Ocean Institute, that's funded by the founder of Google and his wife. And they have a ship named the Falcor that actually is kind of a yacht. It's actually a very plush vehicle that we all kind of scramble to try and get on board occasionally. But they're about to deploy a new ship next year as well. So Smith Ocean Institute, Scripps, us, and the Nautilus at the University of Rhode Island are kind of the major participants in our arena of ocean research. We have different focuses, like the Nautilus is a little bit more public outreach focused, where we're very heavily focused on science research. While we do have a public outreach angle to our research, we're very dedicated to the science of it. And a lot of that's because we're funded by the government directly. And one of our missions, in addition to the video streams that we're going to jump to here in a second, is sonar of the ocean floor. And this actually is just as big a thing for us as is our ROV exploration project, for a variety of reasons. We do highly detailed, high resolution ocean floor mapping continuously as we sail, regardless. Like literally right now, while we're doing a dive, we will be doing ocean floor mapping simultaneously. And the scientific value of the ocean floor maps is immense, both for scientists, for potential mineral extraction. We don't deal a lot with the outgrowth of what the maps are used for. We do know that like oil and gas use them extensively. Marine biologists, environmentalists use them extensively. But we serve a lot of different sectors. And that's one of our mandates from the government, is that we're fairly agnostic about the use of it as long as it fits the US citizen. And because we are funded by the US government, we do have a focus on the deployment of our information to US research groups primarily. And while other groups can access our data, our focus is on US-based institutions because we're funded by the US government. But yeah, minimizing environmental damage, top of the list. And as we're mapping the floor, one of the things we like to highlight, even for people who are involved in oil and gas extraction, is that higher resolution maps allow them to do it more effectively and more environmentally sound practices, so that they don't have to do widespread drilling. In this area, actually, I know is probably known mostly for their fisheries control, which we have nothing to do with. But one of the things about ocean map is that you can actually extend your nation's area of fishing zone, the area where you can legally fish before you get into international waters. Because if you can establish your continental shelf, you can actually get out beyond the normal 200 miles that's allotted by the UN for fishing. And there's actually a small exclusion that if you can do a high resolution map of the continental shelf as it comes off of your country, that can actually establish your fishing zones. And it can go further than the 200 miles that's normally allocated. So it's a big deal across the board for both environmental and commercial reasons that we map the ocean floor. There are huge swaths of the Atlantic and Pacific that have not been mapped yet. And one of our real projects is to reduce the amount that has not been mapped because it's of such huge importance to get mapped for commercial and environmental reasons. So this is kind of what our workflow looks like currently. And this is what we're going to be looking at when we look at the live streams. The Oceanus Explorer is in kind of the mid left there. And all of our communication is via satellite. So we have a very tight relationship with our satellite providers. And that's one of actually my big jobs is I have to get the video streams from the ocean floor, which would be C, the deep discoverer down in your lower right, all the way to the scientists back in the United States. And I have to do that in under 3 seconds for the scientists. The latency, which is the time between what's actually occurring on the ocean floor and when the end user scientist can see it, cannot be any more than 3 seconds. So I've got to get from the ocean floor to the ship, to the satellite, and then back down to the scientist at their research institution with less than 3 seconds lag. So when you're like watching sports from another country, a lot of times you can see the delay between, like when someone asks them a question, then they'll pause for a couple of seconds while it goes up to the satellite and bounces down. The average for a sports event can be 40 to 50 seconds for a satellite delay. And we've been doing tests and we can get it down actually under a second currently from the ocean floor to like a research scientist at the University of Rhode Island. So we've really made huge advances. And one of the reasons it's so important is because that 2 or 3 seconds, the ROV can move somewhere else. And all of a sudden, the things that the scientist wants to see and do are behind the ROV robot. So it's super important that they see it in as close to real time as possible. And that's actually one of my biggest assignment projects is to minimize the time between the ocean floor and the scientist, because it makes such a huge difference in the science research. The general public stream that we'll be watching, I have some more flexibility with, although to be honest, I keep it about 6 seconds. So what we'll be watching will have about a 6-second delay. And the scientist video streams, which is kind of a separate platform that I run, is about half of that, but it's still pretty close. And we've dialed it down to about a second. We're looking at things like low orbit satellites currently. Starlink and Elon Musk is putting up thousands and thousands of low orbit satellites right now, which will be a huge benefit actually to our program, both for bandwidth reasons and for the latency reason. Because they're actually lower in the atmosphere, our transmission time is actually quite a bit less using them. So we're actually starting to move towards lower orbit satellites to reduce the time and to increase the bandwidth. Bandwidth at sea, as a lot of you guys may know, is really difficult to come by and very expensive. One of our largest budget items is actually our satellite bill. And it's well into the 6 figures per summer. You may think your cable bill is large, your internet bill. We have a crazy large satellite bill, and that will help with one of our largest expenses as well if we move to the lower orbit satellites. So let's see. Let me switch over and see what they're doing here on the live stream. I talked to them this morning. We had to shift dive sites because the currents were a bit strong at our original dive site this morning. And if the currents are strong, it moves the robot unnecessarily. It takes a lot of power to get it synced in. And also we had to keep the ship in roughly the same position at sea. For you, those of you who know, it's a very large challenge to keep the ship stationary so that we're not drifting and that the robot's under the water. Now, so we're live right now on camera 1, actually, which is the main ROV. Let me show you, see if I can show you where camera. So this is the main ROV, Deep Discoverer, and the cameras here in the front will be the ones we're looking at here on the view. Looks like we've got a Sea Spider we're currently looking at, and we traditionally run 3 live cameras on a dive. There will be this camera. There will be a sled that's probably about 200-300 yards above, and which kind of controls. So this is Sirius, which is kind of a sled looking vehicle that actually connects the tether right here. And it's kind of an intermediary device to keep our ROV robot powered, stationary, and well controlled. And so we have a camera on that that's actually looking at. So right here are our front cameras that are looking at the Sea Spider right here on the ground. We have what we call the quad view camera, which will give you kind of a little bit of an overview. So this is kind of one of our science views. And in the upper left quadrant is actually the screen that the ROV pilot uses to control the ROV robot. And it's actually very much like a video game controller for the ROV pilots. They have a joystick, control panels, but it's actually not dissimilar from a video game control system for a lot of people. And actually, during their off time, the pilots play video games together and hone their skills on board ship so that they can develop better processes for controlling the ROV robots. So they're actually very adept game players as well, and very skilled ROV pilots. We pull some of the better in the business because it's a very specific scientific mission as opposed to the normal oil and gas maintenance that goes on with a lot of ROVs. We've got a sonar scan in the bottom right quadrant, and it's a piece of software called Fleeter Mouse, which I love to say the name because it's just kind of fun, but is actually a German piece of software that actually tracks our ROVs on the ocean floor, and our mapping guys control the upper right quadrant of this screen. And that's kind of a big picture view of where we're heading and where we're going. And it's a big deal to kind of plot the course for this. So it's a lot of communication with the scientists. Where are we going? What do we want to do? What do we want to see? You know, what are we doing research on? So a lot of communication between the scientists and the mapping guys to kind of plot a course. Most of the interesting life is found around disruptions in the ocean floor, seamounts, ridges, cliffs, trenches. This is where a lot of the sea life ends up aggregating, that we spend a lot of our time researching. As you get into the smoother plains and fields, while there's some interesting things going on, far less life actually takes hold in those areas. So we tend to spend our time around geographic features. And so like where continents meet, we spend a lot of time there. We spend a lot of time in trenches. We did an expedition to the Marianas Trench a couple of years ago where we actually lost. Our ROV imploded on the way up, and little pieces of it came up, and that was kind of the end of the expedition. And we're kind of just getting started this morning, and usually as the dive goes on, you will see us engaging more complex life forms as they start to dial in what's on the ocean floor and start to see where things are going on. I'll show you a video in a couple of minutes of some interesting clips that we have. But you never really know exactly what's going on. It looks like we've got a small coral field. That's not uncommon, but it's also good to see. There's not a ton of coral in the North Atlantic as you move further south. we tend to see a bit more coral going on. So that's kind of our live stream going on right now. We'll you're going to jump back to my PowerPoint, see if I've got any more slides. So what we were looking at right there was actually this workflow kind of played out. And so we've got the Okeanos, which is our ship at sea, which is 500 miles off the coast, doing its mapping. Simultaneously, we've got Sirius, which is camera 2. You can kind of see a little bit of camera 2, what it's looking at, which is the Deep Discover ROV doing its work. And then we've got the Deep Discover on the ocean floor actually doing our science feed for our scientists. One of my projects when I first joined NOAA was actually to get these video streams to the general public and not exclusive. It was exclusively a science research video stream when I first joined. And we had the first actual federal government group with YouTube Live when YouTube Live first started streaming. And it required a lot of negotiation because I can't have advertisements showing up in the middle of our video streams. And there are some very specific requirements we had to have YouTube Live agree to, but they were actually very cooperative, to be honest. And we have a really good relationship with YouTube. And one of the reasons we use YouTube Live is it provides us with a public outreach tool that doesn't cost our science users any money or any resources, and which is super important that we not divert money away from that, but that we can open it up to the public. So what I did was I started duplicating our stream and making it available to the general public via YouTube. And this has been really successful from a variety of reasons. News channels will pick up our live streams. And I've had 500,000 simultaneous viewers on YouTube, like Fox News, CNN will pick up our live stream, especially when we're in like the Pacific, when we were out in Hawaii a couple of years ago. Incredible life. And so it actually generated a lot of news attention. And we're able to provide streams to large audiences without incurring large costs at that point. Previous to YouTube Live providing this to us, we'd actually have to pay for every viewer. And as it got towards a couple hundred or even a couple thousand, the cost became somewhat problematic. And so YouTube Live kind of solved that for us. And so what we're watching right here is actually a YouTube live stream, but it is an exact duplicate of what the scientists are seeing just about 5 seconds later. Our lag time on YouTube is about 6 seconds, which is fine. Scientist lag time is about 2. So they're just seeing what you're seeing in exactly the same form, just a couple of seconds sooner. We did increase it. We were able to increase our resolution this year, and we went from what is called 720p, which is 1280 by 720. And we went to a higher def resolution of 1920, which is actually a real improvement for us. And the limitation was really only related to a bandwidth and how much bandwidth we could afford from our satellite. And we were able, satellite costs are coming down incrementally, especially as Starlink and Elon Musk gets his program up and running. We've seen a decrease in the cost of bandwidth from satellites and expect that to continue. That's a real benefit for our scientists and our public viewers. But I like to remind people what they're seeing is exactly what our scientists are seeing as well. And let me see if I can turn on. Nope, I don't have the audio stream on. But right now, across the audio channels, we've got scientists talking to the ship, and they're talking to actually some commentators that do a running commentary for the general public. And they're actually on separate audio channels. So the scientists tend not to listen to the public commentary that we put out there. All of this is available. And I'll put some links here in the chat room as soon as I can get over to the chat room. All of this is available from our Ocean Explorer website. And I encourage people to actually go by and check it out. The audio commentary is actually we have really good audio commentators. that can describe what they're seeing, and so that the general public can really participate in this. We're getting a little bit of okay, frag. I'm actually working right now, so I'm kind of doing a little bit of double duty. So I'm actually we don't have weekends during the summer for expeditions. We kind of work 7 days a week because we dive almost every day we can when we're out at sea. So I'm actually working right now. So if there's a video problem, you may hear me switch to a different phone signal really quick to try and resolve things, because actually it's my gig to make sure the video streams are going on. And if they drop for even a couple of seconds, the scientists will be quite concerned. Each expedition is funded by a couple of $1 million of both government funding, research grants, and science participation. So every expedition, every dive, there is a large involvement of resources and scientific research. And it's really important that the video streams are up and continuous 24/7. We send streams in the middle of the night. We stream continuously 24/7 while we're at sea, and which is one of the reasons our bandwidth costs at the satellite are so huge. So let's see, let's jump back to our slideshow. Yeah, a little bit about the Interspace Center here real quick. Interspace Center is the University of Rhode Island. It was founded by Bob Ballard shortly after his Titanic rediscovery efforts. He received quite a bit of support, and we run a lot of our video signals and telepresence data feeds through the Interspace Center at the University of Rhode Island. It's a very close partnership, and we've worked, hand in hand with them for the last 20 years. We share personnel. There's not a lot of separation between NOAA, Ocean Exploration and Research, and the Interspace Center. We're very tightly connected in operations. And they also run the Nautilus, which is Bob Ballard's ship there in the lower left-hand corner, which does similar work to us, but not identical work. They're off the coast of Oregon currently. I checked this morning, they didn't have a dive scheduled for earlier this morning. They're, obviously, 4 or 5 hours off of us there in the Pacific. So they're on a little bit different schedule, and they've got a little bit different focus going on right now as far as some geological research they're doing. Interspace Center is actually undergoing a growth phase down at the University of Rhode Island. So you may hear some more about them going forward. In the public field, they actually hold a fairly large presence. They're quite well, especially in Rhode Island. Let's see here. Here's some links I'll try and post in the chat room as well. This is our live stream page at NOAA. Cut and paste that over to the chat room. I can get to the chat room. Anyway, I'll post that there in a minute. Sorry about that. I can't find the chat room immediately. But also there is the Nautilus live stream page, and the Schmidt Ocean Institute RV Falcor is currently in port. They're not out to sea, and they're not probably going to put out to sea until the fall. And once again, they have a little bit different focus on the Falcor. They do a really cool program called Artists in Residence, where they actually put some artists on board to represent the biology and the environment that they see. And they'll send a painter, a sculptor, or a musician, along to kind of give a different feel for a lot of the visuals and a lot of the experience of being at sea, in addition to the science research. So they've got a couple of different angles on it that are actually really interesting on the Falcor. This is our YouTube station there that you can get to from YouTube directly or from our website at oceanexplorer.noaa.gov. Let's go look at, I'm going to show you a couple of videos here that are, let's see what they're doing here real quick. Okay. Looks like we're just checking out a coral field. Looks like we just got a coral field going on. I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite clips here real quick. While they're just bouncing around down there. Let's see. Here's a good one. So I actually spent some time in the Gulf of Mexico with one of the premier octopus squid researchers, which was fascinating back in 2014. And, you know, you'll find them to be very inquisitive. They will actually come up to the cameras, tap on the lenses. They will wrap their arms around our devices. The intelligence level of the octopus and squids is.
We're not seeing every.
Oh, you're not seeing it.
We're seeing part of it.
Let me see if I can. Thank you, Jackie. Let me. Here we go. Is that better? So you can see the
It's cut
squid
off on the bottom. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
And they will actually come. They will look with their eyes right into the cameras. We're not sure about the intelligence level, but it's one of the highest in the ocean. You know, they talk about them being the intelligence of dolphins, and it's an amazing thing to me. You know, the giant squid was actually, it was debated whether there were actually giant squids in existence for years and years. Let's see here. So this is a scene that we came on where some sharks were feeding on a large fish. It's a swordfish. And one of the fascinating things about this, so we're watching them feed, and then the camera angle is going to switch to our upper Sirius here in a second. And so they're munching away on the swordfish. Nice. Okay, so here we go. So the sharks are eating the swordfish, and we're watching, and this is the ROV. And now a giant grouper is going to swim into the scene. And there he is. And this guy is like 8-10 foot. And he's going to hide behind our ROV and eat one of the sharks. He literally used our ROV as a screening device and then came up on the shark and munched the shark. And that's the grouper with the shark in his mouth, literally right now. And used our ROV as cover to get him, which we felt kind of bad about, to be honest. But he got the whole thing in his mouth. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, all kinds of exciting stuff. We don't interfere. We just kind of let them go. Let's see what we're doing here real quick. Let's scope along the bottom. All right. Let's see. So I love octopuses. This is Casper the octopus. He's one of our favorites. We had a ton of views for this expedition. They're amazing animals and one of our scientists' favorites, but kind of a rare sighting. also in one of our cooler videos. There we go. Anyway, so yeah, let me put us back to the live stream here. Here we go. Okay. See where we're heading to. So our dives usually go on for about 8 hours. We try to do a full day of dives, and then we record our videos, we archive them, and then the analysis that goes on afterwards is what we have are teams of scientists who go through and identify every feature that you see. They'll literally frame by frame go through and say, okay, that's a fan coral, that's a jellyfish, you know, and identify all the species and do a lot of the research in post. And we have a system of annotations so that people who come along later can see how they're identified. I'm working on a program right now to use facial recognition to identify underwater fish and life forms underwater automatically, because it's a very tedious process to do it by hand. And I call it fish cognition. But that's one of our huge projects ongoing right now, is to try and automate biology life detection while undersea. And it actually works exactly like facial recognition does. We use Amazon software that they use for facial recognition, but rather than using pictures of people, we will just feed it a stream of underwater objects to try and identify. And we're getting better. Yes, go ahead.
Is it possible for them to hear the live control room just for a moment?
Yes, it sure is. And it's just going to take me a second I need to switch the share screen. So I'm going to turn off the share screen so you guys will see me for a minute. And let me stop sharing and let me reshare here.
Diversity, it seems like, compared to what I would have expected to be up here.
Is that coming across for you guys?
Which is exciting.
Yes, it is.
So I'll let them talk for a second. Of course, she stopped talking as soon as I put her audio stream on, which is exactly how
We're also seeing a number of stalked crinoids as we continue our transit towards the slope. As well as brittle stars hanging out on top of corals and sponges, and on coral and sponge skeletons as well, or dead coral and sponges.
It's like being on the moon.
You know, it's funny you would mention that. NASA is kind of our favorite comparison competitor for operations. And we actually do a fair amount of projects with NASA. We just finished up a project where they want to send an ROV submersible to Europa and Ganymede to do undersea research. And so we're actually doing a project with them right now about telepresence operations underwater on other planets. And that's a cool thing. And they think that that's actually has the potential to be the first discovery of extraplanetary life outside of planet Earth. Makes a ton of sense. Discovery is liquid water, and they're trying to find a submersible that they can use to break through. I think there's a thin layer of ice that they need to break through in Ganymede in order to get into the liquid water. They think that that's the best chance of finding life off of planet Earth right now. So we actually have been working with them for about the last year and a half on submersible technology that they can put on board a rocket to send there. And one of my conversations with them is how our scientists deal with the lag time. So obviously the lag time is going to be much greater coming from a moon.
We're kind of traversing a little more quickly than we were at the start. You know, part of the the goal of this dive is to, cross
Josh,
this,
just started moving maybe 2 minutes
flatter
ago.
area
Do you
here,
agree?
climb up the 70-meter or so high scarp, and get up to the next sort of platform, and sort of investigate what's going on right at the top. So normally, I think we could actually, move 20 meters down here and spend the entire dive looking at just everything that we're seeing. There certainly is no shortage of corals and crinoids and sponges and any other number of benthic fauna. There's obviously some really nice rocks and sediment under all of that as well, but very high diversity and quite high abundance, I think. Is that a little fish or a shrimp? Or maybe a fish?
A little fish.
It's definitely
Go ahead.
a random assortment of things when you go to dive. Sometimes you think, okay, we're dialing in here, and we have a fair idea, especially as you hit the Pacific, which is very biology rich. Atlantic is very hit and miss. We'll do dives. You'll see sand for 6 hours, and we'll just be watching sand go by for hours.
And we heard from some of our experts onshore, Ken Sulek, who it's one of the firework corals.
Yep.
It's clear when video is.
This is it, Anaritagorgia. One of my favorites.
It's now my favorite of all time.
I'm going to switch cameras.
I was saying one of
quick, you
our
guys.
fish experts
I want to see if I think I've got the ROV pilots on camera 3. Let me see if I got those.
Chapman was saying that the environment we're in, the high current, the kind of rocky bottom, coarse sediment, and the certainly high number of large attached corals we're seeing is kind of leading to an unfavorable environment for a lot of fish. So that goes to explaining why we're not seeing so many. We just saw that little one, but the larger ones for sure. And what we're seeing is kind of reflective of why. So that's great information for a non-fish person like myself.
Another move.
Yeah, it's a.
Okay. That one should just be kind of ending.
Sounds like we have a fair contingent of coral creatures involved today. It's we get scientists focused on different
Bridge is
areas on
RV now.
different dives. We have probably
Yeah,
15 or 20 scientists
same
that
as
we work with
last.
regularly.
3-0.
But as we get into different areas, different scientists will join in, and we have chat
Like,
sessions
come in, send in
as well. They're like
video.
Good
doing
copy, thank you.
online chats, and we have a whiteboard available for them as well.
So yep, this is a Metallogorgia. And one of the ophiuroids that is the brittle stars that hangs out right in the middle of them. They always seem to have an associate there with them.
Yes, Casey, and I was noting as we were zooming in, there's a Metallogorgia colony in front of this one that appears to have a piece of sargassum caught on it, which would suggest to me that the Ophiuchreus, that brittle star, that snake star that's living in the center, isn't doing its job well enough. The hypothesis is that these snake stars clear off the colony from anything.
Come down, look at this other one that he's talking
So
about.
maybe it just hasn't detected it yet. You'll see it as we zoom out here.
If you want to come in on this one.
So that would certainly make sense as if it is sargassum, which I believe it is, because we've seen lots and lots of it today up at the surface.
Oh. Yep, seems to have gotten wrapped around the colony there.
Alright, pilot's clear on video is.
So yeah, lots of seaweed. I was shocked at some of the fields of seaweed, especially down in the Gulf of Mexico, that we came upon. Just went on for miles and miles. Just huge banks of seaweed. You know what that really impressed me down the Gulf was the number of oil derricks.
Not only are we
I
seeing,
think about
quite
like
a
oil
diversity
derricks, and I thought, well, there's probably a couple hundred of them. There was 40,000 oil derricks in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Louisiana. And it's a shocking amount of development in the ocean there in the Gulf. That was very surprising to me. We were somewhat involved in the platform leak down there as far as trying to help cap it. That went on for just weeks and weeks, just devastating. And you get down there and you can see how an accident like that could happen because there's just so many thousands of them down there. But yeah, so we also, we will dive shipwrecks. We have special procedures for shipwrecks, both to protect the shipwrecks, scavengers, and also in case we come upon human remains, we actually have a special protocol in case we come upon the remains of a person where we actually cut off the feed because of sensitivities around that. And actually we have like, so 3 or 4 protocols. We have to hide the identification of remains and the visibility of them. We also have to hide the location of shipwrecks in general. So we'll turn off our public facing maps and identifiers actually when we dive on shipwrecks, just to try and prevent them from being further disturbed. Some of them have we have archaeologists, marine archaeologists on staff that we're very closely with. And some things have value outside of just research purposes. So we are very careful to try and hide the exact of shipwrecks, because often we'll be the first one to be there since the ship went down, and especially in the deep ocean. So we don't want to encourage any sort of destructive behavior whatsoever. It's difficult to hide our positioning because if you actually tracked where we were like the day before and the day after, you could kind of zone it in, but it's still a fairly approximate location as far as the shipwrecks are concerned. We're doing some work in the Great Lakes. Actually, I'm part of a project coming up next month where we'll be surveying Great Lakes shipwrecks in Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, which, having grown up in Michigan, it'll be kind of cool for me. I always have like Gordon Lightfoot playing in the back of my head, actually, when we're doing the Lake Michigan stuff. But yeah. Any other questions? Does anybody have any questions they'd like to put out there real quick? Or no? Okay.
I have a question, if I may, James, going
Certainly.
back to your partners within the federal government.
Mhm.
What about for purposes of mapping the ocean floor and the use by the submarine service in particular?
Wow. When you say submarine service, are you referring to like Navy subs or?
Yes, our U.S. Navy submarine service.
Yeah, they actually have a lot of their own material. And while we do share our maps with them continuously, they've got kind of their own thing going on to a large extent. And ours are available to them. And we just got our new high resolution sonar installed at the beginning of this year, and we're just breaking it in. And I expect there will be a closer connection going forward since we got the higher resolution floor scan, because the company that invented it, they just came out with this super high resolution scan. For our purposes, the Navy has had one of their own actually for quite a while that they've been doing scans with for the subs. So we haven't had a ton of involvement with them yet. I expect there will be more, especially around our trench work. We've been heavily involved in mapping some of the deeper trenches. The Challenger Trench and the Marianas Trench have been 2 focus points for us as far as unexplored territory. But very difficult to get instruments down there. It's the pressure, as you guys can imagine, is incredible, and we've lost a couple of vehicles already. And the darkness is very difficult to do exploration in from a visual standpoint. Also, the distance, just cabling the equipment down there is very difficult. The signals on. We actually had to develop a special video transmission system to get video signals from the Marianas Trench up because the cable length was so long. And we've tried like some really obscure wireless where we send like a dataverse via sonar sound signals. We've been trying to do video signals via the same mechanism using sound to deliver the video signals up to the upper ship because it's so difficult to get them from the lower to the upper ship. So I expect there will be more, but has not been a ton thus far because they're very good at what they do already. And they have super high resolution sonars that they developed internally that are just kind of becoming more available to us on the non-defense related side. Actually, our ship, the Okeanos Explorer, is a retired U.S. Navy vehicle from the 90s, I believe. And we're due to get a new ship that they're just starting to build right now, and which should hopefully be online for us in 2 or 3 years. So we're super excited about getting a new ship. And there was a lot of discussion about whether our future was just unmanned drones or whether we would actually build a new ship to replace the Okeanos Explorer, which is getting kind of old now for us. And I was kind of surprised that the government decided to fund a new ship for us, and we're very pleased. So we're going forward with that right now. And in conjunction, we're still doing the automated we call them AUVs for automated undersea vehicles, which will be completely controlled from research institutions on land. And so we're kind of going to do them in conjunction with each other and use our new ship to deploy them in addition to our ROV program that we've got going on. So yeah, so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, if anybody else has a question, please unmute and ask your question.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'd like to know exactly what NOAA is doing to protect the public from sea stars, giant sea stars, and giant groupers.
Well, that's a great question, Deborah. Thank you. We're doing nothing to protect you guys, but what we are doing is a lot of research into pharmaceuticals from the ocean. A lot of our science research is actually around finding life-saving drugs in the ocean that can be used to help people. And one of our most successful programs in that area has been we use the blood from a kind of crab as a blood coagulant, and it's become like literally the only treatment for several kinds of blood diseases. So we literally have some science research institutions that will catch these horseshoe crabs, remove a small portion of their blood, and then put them back. And so we have a cycle where we kind of and the crabs have actually got kind of used to it, and we'll have like multiple variety from specific crabs. And it's actually gotten to be a very environmentally sound, but pharmaceutically beneficial program. So a fair amount of our research is actually with like your Pfizers, your Eli Lilly's, your pharmaceutical drug companies who are looking for very out of the box resources for new drugs. We have a couple of cancer research projects going on with drug companies right now. A lot of interest in that. We call our research with private industries the blue economy. And it's one of the things that gets us a lot of bipartisan support in Congress. We get a lot of conservative support from industrial sectors that help to maintain our program. And as long as they're environmentally sound, we're pretty on board. You know, we're trying to find resolution for undersea mining, and in a way that can be less environmentally damaging, because there's not really a way to stop it going forward, especially if you get to national waters. And we only have so much influence over something. But I gotta say that from an environmental standpoint, individually, we're all really dedicated environmentalists, but our research has to stay fairly agnostic. And we're just trying to point people to good science. And you know, it's up to the citizens of the United States and Congress as far as how they use it. We have a very non-advocacy role in the use of our data and science. And our mission is exploration and to go out and discover things. And while we will do no damage, what our data is used for is really up to the government and to other sectors. We have very little influence or control over that. But I can tell you from a personal standpoint, our group, they're very dedicated environmentalists and are very concerned about the health of the ocean. And you know, this dive is actually quite good because I haven't seen any debris thus far. But I would say on probably 50% of the dives, you will see a fairly substantial amount of debris on the ocean floor. And it's really disconcerting, especially as you get down into like the Gulf of Mexico and some of the heavier developed areas of the ocean. Just, you know, unbelievable amounts of nets and debris, and it just very disturbing. But this is actually a fairly clean area here in the North Atlantic. Thank goodness.
If I could be permitted to ask another question.
Go ahead, for sure.
Along those lines, James.
Sure.
So now you've got all this several years of data.
Mhm.
Is there a way of comparing then? We saw this 5 years ago. We see this today. I would assume there is a very robust effort to see what's been happening over time, and how is that available?
Yeah, Gail, that's a great question. Thank you. So let me switch screens here to one of our research archives that we have going on with the Canadians, interestingly enough. And I'm hoping this comes across. What this is an archive of all of our dives, and actually several of our partners' dives. And what this contains is it's a combination of our video archive and our data, our locations, and our annotations, which is the information that we just like start to tag our videos with, so that people coming along later can identify objects, species, and do a comparison. So ours goes back to our inception, and we really started, you know, hitting it harder in like mid 2000s. We had a couple of expeditions that were earlier than 2006. But overall, around 2005 is the beginning of a lot of our archives. And so they can go through and, you know, pull our material. I'm just hitting one at random. I'm hoping there's a video there, but no. Let's see, here's one in 2008. But so that they can compare. The biggest difficulty is our technology has improved so much since even like 2008, right? The video resolution was poor, the lighting was poor, and it was hard to specifically geolocate down to like feet at that point in time. So it's hard to do a one-to-one comparison. Where we see a lot of comparison factors actually on coral fields, because the coral are long living organisms, and you know, hundreds of years. We see corals that are hundreds, and I think we had one in the Pacific that was 700 years old. I don't think I'm exaggerating on that. But they have really extended lifespans. So a lot of times you can identify areas by coral formations and going way back. So those are really good indicators. A lot of the ocean floor traditionally has been really hard to geolocate with extreme position. But yes, we do maintain this, and we're getting better at it all the time as far as a comparison factor. So the good and the bad of ocean debris is that, as you guys know, because you have cars here, salt water is, extremely corrosive. So a lot of debris does deteriorate quite quickly in an undersea environment. The downside of that is it doesn't disappear, it just becomes smaller than you can see. And this is one of the things about like the debris field out in the Pacific that gets a lot of discussion is people, we want to pick up, the trash that's out there. And yes, we do want to pick up that trash. But what's really problematic is the stuff that's already dissolved into very small, very tiny particles, because much more fish will eat those as very small, like plastic units, than even the bigger stuff, which is a problem. But the very small particles are actually even more problematic. And so what's most important is that we stop putting trash into the ocean. And, what's there should be picked up. And unfortunately, there are a couple of countries that are the main sources of the trash. In the United States, it's not one of them anymore. Like New York used to garbage scows off of, the city and just dump it in the ocean. And that's not going on. So the United States and Canada are actually quite good about this now, and about making sure that ships in our zones don't dump trash. The Coast Guard is actually really good about trying to keep offenders of that to a minimum. Obviously, some stuff, but the main sources of trash, there's a couple countries in the Middle East, and China is a huge offender in this area about just dumping their stuff in the ocean. And that's where, to be honest, most of the trash is coming from anymore. Are just like literally a half a dozen countries who just aren't paying attention to this. So you're actually seeing our areas that are under our influence and patrolled by us getting quite a bit better around the United States. We saw real improvements when we were in Hawaii 3 years ago. And we actually just had some areas around Hawaii dedicated as sanctuary zones. That's a super important thing, because then they're higher patrolled, and the fines get to be so exorbitant that actually the dumping decreases drastically in those point in times. Cruise ships have gotten a lot better about not dumping at sea. So there's been improvement in some areas. There's some interesting endeavors around trying to collect ocean trash, but it's somewhat effective only because a lot of it is already dissolved, or is in the process of dissolving into microparticles that are actually quite a bit more dangerous to ocean life than are the big stuff. And the big stuff is dangerous because, like whales, right, and larger life forms will ingest them. That's still super bad. But the microparticles, everything. And then it starts to affect people because we're eating the fish that have eaten the plastic microparticles. And then that cycle gets to be very detrimental as well. As a little bit of a downer, the ocean's getting warmer does not portend well for ocean life in the near term. There are predictions of a fairly sizable marine life reduction in about 10 odd years due to the ocean warming so significantly. And there are scientists who are hoping that's offset by species that actually will thrive more in a warmer environment, and that's definitely possible. But we're going to see a transition without question. The currents are changing. There's a huge ocean conveyor, we call it the conveyor in the Atlantic, and some of you may be familiar with it, but it drives so much of the weather in the United States. The ramifications of just like a small current change are actually huge on US-based weather systems and world-based weather systems. So the ocean is getting warmer. It's pretty much baked in at this point. And, we're going to have to see, the hopeful side of it is, we've discovered life in some very unappealing environments. We were the first to discover life forms living on undersea volcanoes. I think I've got a video actually. Let me show you a quick video of that. This is kind of cool. Let's see. Yeah. But it was thought that the chemicals, oh, okay, so it's not going to play. I'll have to fix that one later. That the chemicals and temperature coming off of undersea volcanoes would be too extreme for life forms to exist. And we found out that actually there are very specific life forms that thrive in those environments. So we're hopeful. Oh, that's kind of cool. Let me turn on the sound real quick just to see what we've got.
Yeah, sorry, I was not looking at the screen right at that moment. Is there a yellow colony off to the right there, pilot?
Yellow colony?
Yeah.
Rian, what I'm looking for would be an Acanella.
An Acanella, okay. Let's keep going right past the bamboo stalk.
Copy.
There, actually just come in, kind of a yellowy, yellowy orange. It's just above the boulder here.
Copy that.
We can have a quick zoom on that one.
Above the boulder, you said?
Yeah, just above the boulder. A bottle brush coral, kind of got that very tall, bushy bottle brush form there. Oh, no, actually that's the top of a Metallogorgia. That was fooling us.
You haven't gone far enough right yet.
Oh, even further right.
Further right.
Yeah, it was on the screen, but then you zoomed in past it.
That guy right there to the right.
It's on the screen. Where are we? Oh, there we are. Yeah, very bottom right corner.
Yep.
There you go.
You know, one of the interesting things to me is as you listen to the dialogue of them talking, you can start to hear the interplay between the scientists on land and what's going on the ocean floor, and you start to really get a feel for why the delay in latency is such a big deal. If they're more than a couple of seconds off, things have moved on. So this being in real time is really baseline to effective research.
The corner of my eye.
Yeah, beautiful. Really good eyes. Well done, Scott. And yeah, unfortunately, the holdfast is tucked in behind that rock, so maybe we'll come across another one further on our transect here. We can look.
That's clear.
Certainly my list of deep-sea corals that we have encountered so far is getting longer and longer. This is definitely what we consider to be a high-diversity site. Lots of species that we're seeing, and potentially even a coral garden. We're also seeing high densities of lots of different species.
Thanks, Copilot.
Really beautiful to see this today.
She moves down. Definitely feel free to let me know if I'm falling behind.
Oh, you're good for now. But
Copy that.
I don't want to hang under me too long.
Roger. Yeah, I think it's smart to keep kind of the delta you have.
I was on board ship when we switched to
just getting tugged with the tether.
Video here real quick. I was on board in 2018, and let me see if I can find this video really. Here we go. And we were watching the video screen, and we saw a sea snail, just kind of moseying over. I don't think he saw this fish, and we were just sitting here watching. Okay, is he going to fall into the hole? Is he going to fall into? And then a sea snake came up, got eaten by the fish that was waiting for the sea snail. And very interesting because completely unexpected, and the snail survived. But then the snail at the very end, he falls in too. So there he goes. But yeah, it's a fairly random assortment, and you'll be sitting there watching for hours and nothing will happen. And then something will happen. You'll be, wow, something happened. That's kind of the way the live thing works. It's a mixed bag of sandy ocean floor and occasional excitement stuff will happen.
Nothing too unconventional there.
But anyway, so that's kind of my presentation, you guys.
Picking some up too.
I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to chat more, but that's kind
James,
of our
I'm going to
program.
ask you to send me the links by email, and I will make sure that they get out to everyone.
Excellent. I will do so right now. I really appreciate you guys joining me, and I was glad we were able to, It is kind of a coral garden. You
Did I
got
hear
slide
the
by
ship
it.
move completed?
I did.
Really appreciate you guys joining me. I was glad we could get a dive going on, at least. To show you guys what we're up to at NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration and Research.
Yeah, feel free to keep us accountable.
I think everyone will agree
Yeah.
this is absolutely fascinating.
Maybe give it another
Well,
minute.
great.
For serious
Well,
steps
really
taken,
appreciate you
and,
guys joining, and I hope everyone has a great Saturday.